What's up, everybody? I'm Josh Meek, the Uber Geek. Welcome to Pretty Dece, your daily entertainment and pop culture show. Today on the show, we're going to jump into the world of comic books and talk about kind of a little bit of a scary story about kind of the state of the comic book industry at the end of 2017. So our story starts with a comic book retailer called Challenger Comics and Conversation. They're out of Chicago, and this is one of the larger comic shops, the bigger comic shops in the country, of course, in one of the larger cities in the country. So Challenger Comics should be a fairly good representation of the comic industry as a whole. And Challenger Comics is a great shop. They are an Eisner Retail Award-winning comic shop. They do a ton of stuff. They have a bunch of followers on Twitter. They do a lot of kind of pushing of new books. They're overall a really, really great shop. So on Twitter recently, they put out some 2017 numbers, kind of talking about how the shop did as a whole in the year of 2017. And things are looking a little dire, especially in the world of Marvel Comics. So overall, they were down 6.8% versus 2016. So that's their entire business, 6.8% down. And specifically, they were down $21,000 in Marvel single-issue sales alone. That includes not Marvel merchandise, not graphic novels, just single-issue sales. $21,000 less than the year before. That is drastic and incredible. Now, interestingly, DC Comics sales were up $2,000 in that same amount of time. So 21,000 down versus 2,000 up on DC, people are still enjoying DC Comics, but the people who left Marvel in 2017 didn't all just flock over to DC. It indicates that a certain number of them maybe left the hobby as a whole. Those numbers, don't exactly add up. It's just less overall. Even more interestingly, things like t-shirts and pins and all of the posters, all of that extra stuff, that stuff went up as well. So people still enjoy superheroes. They're just not buying the single-issue Marvel comics as much as they were. So, I was kind of like reading around, trying to figure out why that might be, and thinking about my own personal experience with Marvel Comics, why stuff like that might be happening. And really, Marvel has had kind of a bad year. They're very event-focused in their comics. They do a bunch of tie-in books with all of their events as things go around. And Secret Empire was their big event for 2017, which was met with a lukewarm response at best. People generally disliked Secret Empire, and with good reason. They did really silly stuff with Captain America. All of their twists were seemingly unearned, and things don't really end up in an interesting place afterwards. It felt like an event for event's sake. It felt like throwing a wrench into things just so they could make headlines and just so they could make the Today Show and not really trying to make a good story. And I think fans are maybe a little bit starting to vote with their wallet on that front. They're going over to DC Comics where less of that craziness is happening. It's not always this big, universe-wide event. It's just kind of good storytelling, good comics. They're just kind of moving right along. Also, this past year, DC had their Rebirth line in full swing, and Marvel attempted a kind of reboot in the same fashion, and theirs didn't nearly go as well. It was a little bit more disjoint. They were doing different things in different books as far as what the reboot meant, and I think people in general didn't really know where to go, didn't really know where to start, and people were just generally confused, and confusion in the marketplace here leads to people just dropping the comic, unfortunately, and moving on. And, I think that this is scary if you are into comic books in general. This is maybe a bit of a concern. But it's scary if you are into kind of just superheroes as a whole. Marvel movies are doing incredibly well at the box office, but these movies have to be based on something. You have to have source material that feeds into the movies. And if Marvel can't sell comics, if Marvel can't put a good story on the shelves, what does that mean down the line in a couple years, in 5 years, in 10 years for the Marvel movies? You can't just continue to churn Avengers movies forever and ever. You have to feed new characters into this and new stories, and if Marvel continues down their current trajectory, that might not even be possible. Now, the other potentially silver lining to this is one other thing that happened in 2017 was the continued growth of digital comic sales. So Challenger Comics here in Chicago, of course, is a brick and mortar comic book store seeing their sales decline. Meanwhile, things like Marvel Unlimited and Comixology, all the various online comic retailers where you can spend money and get digital comics on your tablet or whatever it might be, maybe those have seen growth. So maybe, the big maybe here is that those numbers that are dwindling for Marvel Comics, maybe those people are moving over to Marvel Unlimited, maybe they're moving over to digital sales in general and doing away with buying physical comic books. I don't know on the numbers side whether that's good for Marvel, good for DC, or not, if people are kind of switching formats, but potentially they're still staying in the hobby and just changing up how they are reading. It's certainly more convenient to get your stuff in digital form if you don't care about that comic collecting aspect. Personally, I've transitioned from, spending hundreds of dollars a month on comics to reading most of my comics digitally. I'll pick up stuff that I still really like in paper form. I'll get trade paperbacks, specifically all of the cool DC Rebirth paperbacks. But Marvel especially, I have an unlimited subscription, so if I can wait 6 months, I can read basically everything that Marvel puts out. So if I was buying directly from Challenger Comics here, you would see me as one of these lost sales in 2017, where I'm still really around, I'm still really giving Marvel my money. So hopefully that's the case, but if it's not the case, it certainly has scary things to say about comics and the comic fandom as a whole. So that's going to do it for Pretty Dece for today. Thank you very much for joining me here on the show. Make sure that you like Pretty Dece on Facebook, facebook.com/PrettyDeceShow. Follow me on Twitter @PrettyDeceShow and visit PrettyDeceShow.com. Also, check out the first episode of Pretty Dece Director's Cut. It is a long-form podcast that we just started, and we are basically diving into topics that Pretty Dece would normally cover. We're just spending more time on them. So the first episode of that just went out. You can find that on the podcast feed or on the YouTube channel. We talk about the movie Bright, we talk about Star Wars The Last Jedi, and just general best of the year lists. So that's something that you can expect every 2 weeks, and it was a blast to do. So expect more of those in a couple weeks. So we'll be back tomorrow for another daily episode here of Pretty Dece. In the meantime, make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you are listening or watching on so you never miss any of the content.